Thank you for this very warm words of welcome, and thank you also for the organizer for inviting me to speak to this very interesting conference. And I remember very well that I was here, not in this room, but in the conferences, I think several years ago, and I have always very good idea about these discussions, because it's so important that we discuss very different perspectives, very different issues from different parts of the earth, and therefore I will try to bring together a business view in this discussion, and I will try to make use of the next minutes to give you a brief overview about our thinking on corporate social responsibility, the global challenges on sustainability, and then how we will try to bring it into practice in a company like the Volkswagen AG. And I hopefully we have time to discuss some of the theses. And please don't hesitate. If you have any question, interrupt me. I think it's much more important to have an open discussion, to try to find out different perspectives, since that I have the opportunity to show all my slides. There are really very lot of this. There are some definitions about CSR. I don't want to go into the detail, but I think it's very important for us that this is, on the one hand, a voluntary approach, and it is more than compliance. It means all the activities concern social and environmental issues, and very important for us, and I try to show it for you in the next minutes, to go into an active dialogue with different parts of the society, with the so-called civil society, with other organizations, but also with the political sphere. A little bit shorter is an academic definition from Philip Kotler and Nancy Lee. Corporate social responsibility is a commitment to improve community well-being through discretionary business practices and contributions of corporate resources. I think we can work with this definition very comfortable, and I will show how we try to integrate this in our strategic approach, but also, let's say, in our daily business. But I think it's also necessary to see there are some academic controversies about CSR, and maybe some of you know there are the first Milton Friedman and the second Paul Samuelson Nobel Prize winners in economics, and the most important, let's say, anti-CSR approach is this from Milton Friedman. In a very short notice, business of business is business, or a little bit broader discussed, few trends could so thoroughly undermine the very foundations of our free society as the acceptance by corporate officials as a social responsibility, other than to make as much money for the stockholders as possible. Clear words from Milton Friedman, but also clear words from Paul Samuelson. You may know he died, I think, several months ago, and he was a very famous economist, and he said, a large corporation these days not only may engage in social responsibility, it had damn well better try to do so. We'll try to do so. And I will now not go in detail with also a very interesting definition from Michael Porter. To bring it in some thesis, I think, in my opinion, CSR is, let's say, a new form of business governance. And that means, as I already mentioned, CSR means more than legal compliance, and so CSR is necessarily voluntary in basic parts and not a matter of regulatory fact, and therefore is competitively driven. I think this is also a very important issue. CSR requires and promotes transparency and accountability, and thereby leads to new internal corporate control system and information system. For example, such systems I am responsible for in our country, not in our country, in our company. CSR is a dialogue-oriented internally and externally, and it needs a systematically integration of the stakeholders in forms of dialogues. And I think very important for us, for the actual discussion, is there is not an opposition between the traditional approach and the new approach. In my opinion, and we try to bring it in practice in the Volkswagen company, CSR integrates the earlier philanthropic approach while going beyond it with a value-based and strategy-based component, and is tied up with the company's economic core processes. Though we don't ignore the former approach to help people and to engage in projects and philanthropic activities, but in our opinion, it's more important to integrate these projects, and I will show you some examples from our company, to integrate these in the strategic approach of the company, because it's much more important that there is not a division between, let's say, some things look nice, do good, and on the other side, the strategic decisions, but it's very important to integrate it. And I think the bridge for all this is what we call the sustainability approach. In my opinion, CSR is, so to speak, the corporate contribution to sustainability. And therefore, I will also bring some ideas for sustainability, because in my opinion, sustainability is really the, let's say, lead concept for societal development in the 21st century. And I think all in all, there is an agreement about this. And we, for example, refers to this agreement in our annual report from last year. Nowadays, the vision of sustainability is completely accepted all over the world. This could be a point of discussion. What sustainability development essentially means is that our business practices and depletion of resources must not compromise the ability of the future generations to meet their own needs. This is a famous definition from the so-called Brundtland Commission from 1880. Environmental, economic, and social objectives must be reconciled. I think this is the basic for all the following activities. And I have here a lot of pictures from a study where Volkswagen was involved. It's a so-called World Vision 2050 from the World Business Council of Sustainable Development. But I don't want to go in detail of all these pictures, because then we have to discuss until the evening. But you see there are a lot of very serious challenges on sustainability. For example, the greenhouse gases keep rising, the concerns of water stress for a lot of people, for more and more people worldwide. But also you see what you call the ecological footprint. I don't know, are you familiar with the term of ecological footprint? I think so. So you can see when we go in a way as business as usual, we need in 40 years, 2.5 years Earth, so to speak, or we have to find out how we can reduce our ecological footprint with, let's say, technological innovations and economic development. But we have, on the other hand, also to face a very high uncertainty, for example, about resource scarcity. On the one hand, there will come resource scarcity, but nobody knows when and in which way. So, for example, here you can see a lot of very interesting and well-known research studies from different institutions and also from companies. And you see on the one hand the forecast of the date of the peak of oil, so to speak, of peak of oil, and on the other hand the uncertainty. And you see all in all, and this is the only sign of this picture, it is there a high uncertainty concerning the so-called peak of oil. You see also the demographic changes. The whole world becomes aging. Very important for us as a car producer is a discussion about the perspectives of individual mobility and urbanization. And I think we have to find out there completely new solutions. But also, and this is also very important for us, we have to face a rapidly expansion of the so-called global middle class. And this is very important for us, you can understand, because as far as we know, there is no other stable correlation between the personal income and the wish to have a car. And therefore, you can understand what happens today in China, what happens today in Russia, what happens in India, what will afterwards happen maybe in Africa. So I think all in this way, there are a lot of perspectives for individual mobility, and we also know we have to bring these needs into a sustainable solution. We need, therefore, new technology perspectives I will show later. We have also a discussion, but this will be another point, about how we can measure well-being, how we can measure happiness. I think this will be a very interesting discussion because we need new ideas. What is well-being? What is happiness? What is progress? What is technological innovation? And it's very interesting to see there, for example, this is for the United States, that there is no correlation between economic development and happiness. And therefore, I think it's necessary to have a discussion in this field too. All in all, we have to face serious challenges on sustainability. To bring it in the, let's say, business speech, we speak about the so-called ESG risks. That means we have facing environmental risks, social risks, and geopolitical risks. You all know climate change, global warming, scarcity of resources, but also more and more becoming important, water and biodiversity, social drift, growing inequality, demographic change, and also very important, I think this is an issue you discuss very intensively during this conference, the geopolitical risks, asymmetric wars, weak zones of governance. You can imagine that a company like Volkswagen, who has 61 locations all around the world, and buy his cars and sell his cars, sorry, in more than 150 countries worldwide, that we are really very, very interesting about a world of peace and of stability, because when you see more and more growing so-called weak zones of governance, that this is not an ideal environment to build economic stability, to build progress, to go on a pathway also to sustainability. And I think, therefore, it's also very important to find new partnerships, new kinds of dialogue. For example, here very short present, but I think it's important to see how we can bring together the private sector, NGOs, and the political sphere. And I think, and I can only say here, it for the private sector, we are up to now really deeply convinced that only in this way we have the opportunity to go on a pathway forward for globalization. This is, I think, also a new idea discussing globalization. I remember the discussion, let's say 20 years ago. There we have a lot of discussing restricting the opportunities for globalization in terms of environmental disasters and all these things. All in all, I think under the umbrella of sustainable pathway, we have now a new opportunity to discuss globalization. And this is very important, as I already mentioned for Volkswagen. Only some figures for Volkswagen. We have now really nearly 370,000 employees worldwide, as I mentioned, and the average of production per workday is around about 27,000 cars. And we have, as I mentioned, 61 locations now worldwide, and therefore I think it's so important for us that we discuss all our issues under a global perspective. It doesn't make sense to discuss it with a national point of view or at least with a European point of view. It's for us so important to discuss it under a global perspective because we are really acting global day by day. And therefore, it's also important for us that we have formulated a clear strategy view. We have formulated that we will become the economic and environmental leadership in the global automotive industry until the year 2018. And I think all in all, we are on a good way to realize this target. And especially for us, is important to combine the creation of sustainable value in financial terms, in location of production and all these things on the one hand, on the other hand, with environmental leadership to continuous improvement of the existing technologies on the one hand, but also the leadership in alternative technologies like e-mobility and so on. I don't want to go into detail with the actual economic figures, but you can see there all in all with the outlook of the existing 2010, we are not so unsatisfied. You see there on the one hand really the deep results of the crisis on the one hand with the operating profits. This was the problem in the 2009 year, but compared to other companies, we have already earned money in the year 2009. There were a lot of companies which were writing red figures, so to speak. And we increased during the crisis our deliveries to the customers, and the sales has dropped down, but not so huge. All in all, as formulated there, we have a lot of ideas that we will have a positive outlook for this year and also a good perspective for the coming years. I will now start with some ideas of CSR management, of CSR thinking. Most important is, I think, here is a very simple pyramid. First of all, I think most important are good management practices, risk management, compliance systems, as I already mentioned. The daily operational business is the basis of all the other activities. And if we succeed in this way, then we are able to make use of this in terms of strategic advantages. And only on the top of the pyramid, reputation can be the result of all these activities if we are really credible, if we are successful in the other fields of activities. Otherwise, there we will have a serious lack of credibility, and this is not in our interest. We have, for long term, formulated some group values. I don't want to go into detail with this, and we have formulated a mission statement. We have also formulated a so-called code of conduct. This is very important also for us. For example, you may know we were one of the first companies who signed the initiative from the former United States Secretary General of Kofi Annan, the so-called Global Compact. And there you may remember the 10 principles of Global Compact are on the one hand dealing with environmental concerns, with social concerns, but also with fighting corruption. And it's very important for us that we have installed there a very strong system and a very consequent system here formulated in our code of conduct, but it have also a lot of very concrete organizational parts like an ombudsman system, an independent ombudsman system, and whistleblowing system, and all what you can expect from a company like Volkswagen. We have early formulated this model of sustainability, and I don't want to go into detail, but very important is here that we develop this in a very deeply information exchange, communication process between international organizations like the already mentioned Global Compact, but also, as I mentioned, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, or the ILO, or the OECD. This is very important for us that we on the one hand have our specific approach, but this happens in a really extensively used discussion process with these institutions. Very important for us, as I mentioned, is the so-called social charter. We were one of the first global companies who signed such a social charter with the board member management of Volkswagen, the group Global Works Council, to bring these ILO conventions in all our locations, in all our plants in the world. Also complementary to the social rights is here formulated the environmental policy. and it's absolutely necessary for us, and that we have not only these high certification standards from ISO 14000, let's say, in the European locations, but also in all the other locations in the world, like South America and so on. This only for a first impression. It's for us very important that we are discussing all these things, not just today. We are really proud about a long tradition of social and ecological innovations. And you can see here, it is a long tradition here, let's say the last 30 years, that we on the one hand try to bring in technical innovations, but these are already combined with social innovations. For example, we have already established the corporate foundation of Volkswagen do Brasil 30 years ago because, as I mentioned already, it's very important for us not only to work inside our locations, but also work in the environment of the location. And therefore, you can say, to bring it on a short perspective, our understanding of sustainability includes, let's say, 3 pillars. On the one hand, our core competencies, building cars with very advanced technologies on the one hand, also to be sustainable in the production processes with energy efficiencies, with the use of renewable energies. So, for example, it is very important for us that we have made really progress in introducing these renewable resources. One plant, it's here is a German plant, it's near to the North Sea, and you can imagine there's a lot of wind and we make use of it. So, for example, the part of the energy consumption for the production processes in our plant in Emden is now comes 1/3 from renewable resources. So I think this is really a good figure because it is important for us to make also use of these perspectives. And I will stress further for this, it's also for us important that we have a 3rd pillar of sustainability. This means to be involved in structural development, to be involved in corporate foundations, in educational and health. And I will show these pictures. I will not to go into detail with the CSR management, but I will show at the end of my short presentation only how we work as CSR in practice with stakeholder dialogues and some global projects. And it is important for us, as I mentioned, that we have a lot of, this is, let's say, the world of stakeholders for a company like Volkswagen. And you can imagine there are a lot of serious discussion and a lot of issues to discuss with all these groups. And for example, very important for us is a capital market. And therefore, it's important for us, let's say, an annual performance test. How is our standing in the so-called CSR ratings, in the so-called CSR rankings? Let's say, for example, the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. It's a very ambitious and also well-known sustainability index today, but there is only a short picture and a small selection of all these rankings and ratings. And this is, for us, very important that it is, let's say, a kind of acceptance, not only acceptance, but also a kind of performance test for us. And it becomes more and more relevant for us. And this is also a part where you see now what I, at the beginning of my presentation, formulated, the integration of these issues into the core competences of a corporate like Volkswagen. There are some other stakeholders, and for us it's therefore also important that we're starting now a campaign inside and outside our corporation. We call it Think Blue, and it's for us important to start, let's say, a campaign with consumer awareness rising, because on the one hand, we are competent in offering technical solutions, but this is not enough, because you have to make use of these technological opportunities. And it seems to be a paradox, but it's a really truth, as sophisticated, as ambitious the technical solutions become, as more important is the consumer behavior in this field. And therefore, it doesn't make sense that we offer a very sophisticated technology, let's say, and the consumer didn't accept these technological solutions and didn't make the right use of it. Therefore, it's very important and becomes more and more important that we arise awareness to make use of our technological solutions. This is not enough to go into detail, but very important is for us also to bring it not only in our location, in our parts of the value chain, but also to bring it in the whole value chain, to bring also the ecological and social standards in, for example, the supplier chain relations. And this is one of the most important projects I have to deal with, to bring our standards into the supply chain. And I will end with some traditional corporate citizenship projects. There are some of the main fields where we are active in, and we are now, let's say, all in all, running about 150 projects in this field around the world. And this is very important for us, that they are really decentralized, organized. It doesn't make sense to organize a CSR project from the desk, let's say, in the headquarters of Wolfsburg. This must be an activity from the ideas, from the motivation, let's say, from our colleagues in Argentina or in Brazil or in South Africa. And therefore, for example, it is very important for us that we have there within 30 years now a foundation in Brazil. And this is important for us. This is not only a philanthropic approach. This is our, let's say, enlightened self-interest, because I think there is what you call sometimes a win-to-win situation. We are addressing a social problem, the need of education, the need of healthcare, but we are also, it's our natural own interest that we have well-educated employees, for example. Therefore, it's so important that we are engaged in these fields, not only in Brazil, but also in South Africa. And as I mentioned, it's important for us that we are involved in all these activities at different levels, not only the national level, but more important, the European and the international level. To come to a conclusion, I think I mentioned a lot of global risks at the beginning in a very fast-running overview. But more important for us is especially to see then what are the opportunities of globalization. And I think all in all, development and well-being through an international division of labor and technical progress brings a lot of opportunities in these parts of the world where it is necessary. And we have therefore also to deal with education, with interculturalism, and all in all, I think that globalization becomes now a driver of sustainability. And therefore, I will end with a conclusion, some thesis. Corporate action needs an ethical basis. Economic activities, and this is, in my thinking, very important, is a problem-solving activity for the sake of higher-order purposes and not for its own sake. I think that's very important for the economics to know about these. Strategic CSR is an implementation concept for an ethically based corporate action and means more than legal compliance. DSR is, as I mentioned, the so-called business case for sustainability as a concept of a broader social development. And you remember as last pictures, customer, the public, and capital markets expect tangible efforts in terms of sustainability and corporate responsibility. And therefore, CSR means more than legal compliance and is competitively driven. It integrates the earlier philanthropic approach. I think this is very important because I have read a lot of academic research to balance all these discussions, but it doesn't make sense. I think the direction is quite clear to integrate the traditional approach into the new approach as a strategic approach. And therefore, it promotes transparency, accountability, and brings new informations and reporting systems I mentioned, for example, the standards for us. We make use for our sustainability report forthcoming in the spring next year. And the most important thing for me is CSR needs really a global perspective. Otherwise, we can contribute our competences as we can in a way I tried to show you in a very brief overview. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Dr. Prätorius. You had a big responsibility on your shoulders today as one of the few representatives of the private sector, so I think it was really excellent to have your perspectives and analysis. We'll take a few questions. Maybe we'll start this time in the back, and we'll come to the front. I want to take turns, and we'll group a few questions together. Is that okay?
That's fine.
Excellent. Okay. And please introduce yourself, Osa.
Hi, my name is Torsten Sewing from an NGO called Breaking the Ice. We're working in the field of conflict and coexistence, mainly bringing together youth from different sides of the divide. My question concerns about what you could call virtuous circle between economy and peace. So in order to install more peace, very broadly speaking, more peace in a country, you could help the economy to take off, and in order, whenever you have upped the level of economy in that country, that could increase the peace. So this is like the economy of peace, a very broad concept. I'd like you to maybe extend on that, what that could mean to Volkswagen, and in relationship to that, the role that a brand could play in that. I mean, in a way, would that be a topic for Volkswagen to get involved in regards to, for example, business development and approaching countries that either have not been approached yet to broaden the positioning there, to increase the sales in their long term, or could that embetter the positioning in existing markets? Thanks.
Thank you. Let me go to the front, and then I'll go to the side, please.
First of all, thank you very much for a remarkably interesting presentation. You've almost convinced me to switch my next car purchase from Toyota to, to VW. My question is this. I was really impressed by the VW approach to corporate responsibility. Can you give examples of any other industry, let's get away from automobiles, but any other industry that's even close to what you people are doing?
Thank you. We'll take one to the side, and then maybe I'll go back.
Again, thank you very much for your very informative presentation. My name is Stuart Zahn, and my question is kind of about the competitively driven sort of system. Does it make you sort of change your approach, or just re-entrench you in your approach when you have to compete with other corporations in your same industry that are kind of not following the corporate responsibility model and just kind of getting bailed out by governments? Does that make you change your approach, or does it make you re-entrench and sort of stick with the current model? Thank you.
Maybe a final question from the back. Is that okay? One
That's
more?
fine, then I will try to give an answer.
My name is Francis Ago. I work with the Transform Nigeria Citizens Initiative. It's an organization, NGO. I don't know whether you mentioned something about integrating traditional approach to new approach. So my question is, there are many traditional approaches in countries where there is conflict between the local forces, the national and the ethnic or cultural level. So my question is, what is the approach to the traditional aspect? How does the ethical character come in the international organization to take care of the ethical standard? That is my question.
Thank you very much. Dr. Prätorius, please.
Thank you very much for this very interesting question. I fear I will not give a satisfied answer for all these because it takes a lot of time, and to be also honest, I'm not competent to discuss a lot of these things in detail. But first of all, thinking about the involvement of the brand ideas in the discussion about peace and economic development is an interesting idea, but I have not enough thought about this, and also I think there are a lot of other very competent people in our company. We can discuss about it. I remember, for example, we made some ideas together with initiatives. With initiatives. I think it was called Sound Foundation. There we supported a lot of young people to make music and all these things and to create ideas in this direction. So we have a lot of activities in this field, but to be honest, it's not a really, let's say, a kind of systematical worked out approach up to now. And I think this is also a very serious question, because I hope I have shown we are a global company and we have some influences and we have producing a lot of impressive, let's say, facts and figures on the one hand, but on the other hand, we have to be honest, we have to accept the division between political development and the economic purposes. And for us, it's very important, for example, that we have a stable development of the political framework. And to say it in a very simple way, economic development is nothing without peace. And therefore, it's so important that you are discussing issues, how we can make sure that peaceful development will be the main pathway for the future. But there we have also, for our activities, to accept the division of labor, let's say, between the economic sphere and the political sphere. There we are also dependent from the political development. We can say from our side, as more the prosperity is growing in countries, as less they are involved in critical discussions in civil wars or something like this. So we are so deeply interesting to have serious basis for an economic development. And this is, I think, the common interest, to come to the next question, of the whole industry. And therefore, I think we have a lot of common interests, of the whole interests, but also as a person who is convinced all in all about the efficiency of the marketism, of the market mechanism, I think it is also important that we find the right balance between cooperation on the one hand and competition on the other hand. And therefore, we have a lot of common initiatives, and for example, we work really close together with our even with our competitors in the automotive industry, but also in other industries. I think I mentioned, for example, the national dialogue platform eConsents, where we work close together, for example, with the colleagues of the chemistry industry. And I think all in all, they have similar standards as we have, and they are also very ambitious in these targets, but they are not so, let's say, well known, because they are sometimes producing B2B and not B2C. And therefore, for example, a lot of the products, let's say, from the BASF, you don't see in your daily work, but they are also deeply involved in this, let's say, sustainability thinking, and we are really good partners in working together in this field. And also with our competitors in the automotive industry, we have a lot of common projects. For example, we have also running a project concerning how we can manage the whole supply chain, how we can bring in these ecological and social standards in the supply chain, because this is our common interest. And we have also a long experience to see where is a field of cooperation, and then when it becomes sensitive, we stop and then we compete. And this is a perfect working field, I think, all in all. I think concerning the last question, what we can do is our contribution to economic development. And I mentioned, for example, also on the way on globalization, we have a very important approach called localization. This means, on the one hand, to bring local, to bring part of the value chain into the local environment. And this is, on the one hand, an economic advantage for us, because when we build up a location, let's say in Russia, then it is necessary to build up also Russian suppliers, because it's cheaper to get the parts from this regional environment. But it is also a contribution to the economic development in this region, because it brings jobs, it brings infrastructure, it brings education, schools, and so on. And I think this is very important to combine these things. On the one hand, our own economic interest, we have economic interests, that's very important, and it doesn't make sense to ignore it. But to see this is also a contribution to the economic developments in these different countries and regions. And we have a long experience in doing so, let's say, for example, in South Africa, but also in Brazil, and hopefully we will also postpone it, for example, now in developing the market of India.
Well, Dr. Prätorius, allow me to take this opportunity to express my gratitude for you, I think, for a very insightful presentation on the topic of corporate social responsibility, but also the specific example of Volkswagen. I think it's great to see an example of a German private sector company who actually has taken a moment to say, okay, what responsibility do we have for not only our markets, but actually the rest of the world? So I thought that was great. And as an advisory board member of ICD, we'll have to, as our homework, see how we can get some Volkswagens to be used by the ICD community.
We will do.
But that'll be maybe our homework assignment for the future. But if you could all please join me in a very, very warm thank you for Dr. Prätorius. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.